Welcome to the True Man Podcast. This is an invitation to radical reconstruction of a man's masculine heart and soul and a place of safe community where we dare to ask questions deep seated inside a man and explore ways to help you become a better man, a better son, a better dad, and a better spouse. Well, it is great to have you with me here on podcast number 180. Wow. I'm so thankful to have you here with me again this week. Now, I was at an event recently and heard a great speaker, and he talked about three things we need to do to be great leaders in life: humility, generosity, and love. And as I commonly do when I hear someone speak, I thought to myself, probably need to think a little bit more about humility. Not that I haven't had any, but sometimes I hear a word or a phrase and I think, I would love to explore that. And I always think in my own little way that if I'm thinking about it, maybe you're thinking about it too. So let me start by asking you a question. Are others attracted to the humility in you? Now, it's really an interesting question. Maybe it hit you between the eyes. I don't know. It's an interesting question to explore. And truthfully, I have to say I haven't always been humble. In fact, at times I've probably allowed my pride to get in the way of being humble. Have you ever experienced that? Now, humility is often misunderstood, I think, in today's culture where pride and ego and self promotion are celebrated. Now, I remember growing up watching the great Walter Payton that played for the Bears. No, I'm not a Bears fan, but Walter Payton was simply one of the greatest running backs of all time, and sweetness was always a lot of fun to watch. And every time he would score, and he scored a lot, he would simply stand up, or if he didn't get tackled, he would just hand the ball to the referee like nothing happened. Nowadays, it seems like a disco breaks out in the end zone when somebody scores. Now, I'm all for having fun. Don't get me wrong here, but sometimes a little fun can go a little far. And Walter Payton's idea of scoring a touchdown was just act like you've been there before. Now, of course, some equate humility with weakness. Nobody would ever equate Walter Payton to weakness, that's for sure. But uh being thinking about that, being humble means it's not about allowing others to walk over you, excuse me. But the true humility is not about being passive or weak. It's about having a clear and honest view of yourself and knowing your strengths and your limitations and recognizing that you are not the center of the universe. I know the way people post social media posts, you would think that they were, but you're not. At its core, humility is a mindset. It's the ability to put others first, to admit when you're wrong, and to accept that you don't have all the answers. It's a willingness to listen, learn, and serve without demanding recognition or praise. Now, humility doesn't diminish your value or your strength. In fact, it allows you to lead much more effectively and influence others positively and live with integrity. Now, a humble man knows that he is not the source of his own success. He recognizes that his talents, his abilities, and his achievements are a gift from God. And he understands that without God, he is nothing. Humility, therefore, is deeply connected to our acknowledgement of God's sovereignty and our dependence on Him for everything in life. And it's important to know and understand that. So, why does humility matter? Well, humility matters because it keeps you grounded in reality. Pride, on the other hand, distorts your perspective, making you think that you're better or more important than you are. And when you let pride take control, you become blind to your flaws, which leads to bad decisions, broken relationships, and ultimately failure. On the other hand, humility opens your eyes to truth. It allows you to see yourself clearly, both your strengths and your weaknesses, and it helps you make better decisions. Isn't that what you're after anyway? Humility also builds stronger relationships. Now, no one wants to be around a man who thinks he knows everything and never admits when he's wrong or is constantly seeking attention and praise. A humble man, however, attracts others because he's approachable, teachable, and willing to put others' needs above his own. And people respect a man who can admit his mistakes and learn from them. Haven't you experienced that? I know I have. Sometimes I just have to admit I'm not perfect. Now, in a professional setting, in your job and your calling in life, humility is critical for growth and success. A humble leader listens to his team. He values their input and fosters a collaborative environment. He's not afraid to say, I don't know, or I was wrong, because he's more focused on achieving the mission than protecting his own ego. And this kind of leadership inspires trust and loyalty from others. Now, on a personal level, humility really brings peace. When you're constantly trying to prove yourself or get ahead of others, you're never truly content. But when you humble yourself, you can accept where you are, work diligently, and trust that God is in control. Now, this brings a sense of calm even in difficult situations. So maybe I've asked the question, and you should ask the question, excuse me, why is it important to practice humility over pride? Well, the temptation for men is often to choose pride over humility, right? Pride is that new car, that big house, the swimming pool, all the toys, isn't it? And society encourages men to be dominant, self reliant, and aggressive in pursuing their goals. There's a certain pressure to appear strong, right? Never show weakness and always be in control. But these attitudes lead to pride, and pride leads to a downfall. Pride blinds a man to his own flaws and creates a barrier between himself and others. A man full of pride refuses to listen to others. He sees himself as better than everyone else and is quick to take credit, but slow to admit mistakes. And this attitude not only destroys relationships, but it also limits personal growth. Humility, on the other hand, opens the door to growth and learning. A humble man knows that he doesn't have all the answers, and there is always more to learn. And he's willing to take advice from others, acknowledging his mistakes and make changes. This kind of openness leads to wisdom, growth, and ultimately success. Humility also fosters stronger relationships. Who doesn't want that? Men who practice humility are better husbands, fathers, friends, and leaders because they are focused on serving others rather than elevating themselves. They are quick to listen, slow to speak, and able to admit when they're wrong. And this kind of humility builds trust and respect in all of your relationships. And finally, humility keeps a man grounded in his faith. Pride leads a man to believe that he's in control, that his success is a result of his own efforts. But humility, well, that reminds a man that he is dependent on God for everything. And it keeps him focused on God's will rather than his own. And it leads him to seek God's guidance in all areas of life. So, why is humility one of our greatest virtues, if not the greatest virtue? Well, humility is an often overlooked virtue, don't you think? But it is one of the most important. Without humility, a man cannot fully grow in his character or in his relationship with God. Humility is the foundation upon which all other virtues are built because it keeps a man focused on the right things, serving God and others rather than elevating himself. Be a giver, not a taker. Humility enables a man to be honest with himself. It helps him see his own shortcomings and motivates him to make changes. A man without humility will never truly grow because he'll never admit that he needs to change. Humility also makes a man more compassionate and empathetic towards others. And when you're humble, you recognize that you're not better than anyone else, which makes it easier to serve and love others. Humility is also a powerful tool because it leads to wisdom. And the Bible says in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with humility comes wisdom. A humble man seeks wisdom because he knows he doesn't have all the answers. He is teachable, always willing to learn from others and from God. Most importantly, humility aligns a man's heart with God. Pride sets a man at odds with God's, but humility brings him closer. In James chapter 4, verse 6, it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. A man who walks in humility receives God's grace, guidance, and blessings. So, how does humility connect to our dependence on God? Well, humility is closely tied to our dependence on God because it requires us to acknowledge that we're not self sufficient. Pride tells us that we can do it all on our own, that we don't need help from anyone, not even God. But humility recognizes that without God, we are nothing. Jesus said in John chapter 15, verse 5, apart from me, you can do nothing. This is the essence of humility. It's the recognition that we are completely dependent on God for every breath, every ability, and every blessing in our lives. Humility keeps us aware of our need for God's grace and mercy each and every day of our lives. A humble man doesn't need to try to control everything in his life. Instead, he submits his plan to God and trusts that God's will is better than his own. He understands that his success is not because of his own strength and abilities, but because God's blessings. He lives with a sense of gratitude and dependence on God for all things. Humility also leads to a deeper relationship with God. And when you're humble, you're more likely to seek God's guidance in your decisions, to pray for his wisdom, and to rely on his strength rather than your own. And this dependence on God brings peace and contentment because you know that you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. No, you're not. God is. What a blessing to know that. Now let's look at the greatest man that ever walked the face of the earth. How did Jesus embody humility? He's the ultimate example of humility, in fact. Though he was God in the flesh, he did not demand the honor and the glory that was rightfully his. Instead, he chose to live a life of service and sacrifice, putting others first in everything he did. Look at Philippians chapter 2, 6 through 8. It captures Jesus' humility perfectly. Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Now, Jesus' entire life was marked by humility. He was born in a manger, right? Not a palace. He spent his time with outcasts and misfits, the poor and the sinners, not the wealthy and the powerful. He washed his disciples' feet, taking on the role of a servant, even though he was their master. Even in his greatest act of love, dying on the cross, Jesus showed incredible humility. He could have called down legions and plagues of angels to save him, but instead, he willingly laid down his life for the sake of others. He humbled himself to the point of death, showing us that true greatness is found in serving others, not in exalting yourself. So, how can humility help us to achieve success? Well, humility is a powerful asset for men because it leads to true success. Success that is not measured by wealth, status, or power, but by character, relationships, and the impact that you have on others. It's all within your control through Christ. A man who practices humility is more likely to succeed because he is teachable, he is coachable. He doesn't think he knows it all. So he's always willing to learn and grow. And this mindset leads to continual improvement, both personally and professionally. Humility also makes a man a better leader. People are drawn to leaders who are humble. They are attracted to this type of person who listens, who admits their mistakes, who are willing to serve others. Humility builds trust and respect, and these things are essential for leadership. In relationships, humility is the key to building strong, lasting connections. A humble man, well, he is willing to admit when he's wrong, to ask for forgiveness, and to put others' needs before his own. And this kind of humility strengthens marriages, friendships, and family relationships. And finally, humility keeps a man grounded in his faith, and it reminds him that he's not the center of everything, that his success is not his own doing, and that he's dependent on God for everything. This leads to a life of gratitude, contentment, and peace. And Jesus' life shows us that humility is not a sign of weakness. Oh no, it's a sign of strength. But what about you? Where do you show on the humility spectrum? Where do you show up? Does it get in the way of your jobs, your family, or your relationships? The reality is we are all humbled from time to time. I've come to believe that this is actually a good thing. Perhaps not fun thing to go through when it happens, but it's good to keep ourselves in check, isn't it? It's good to turn it over to God and to realize that he is the one in control. And life isn't about being boastful. It's really more about being grateful, loving, and full of joy. Well, this show isn't called the True Man Podcast for nothing. No, Jesus shows us the way, doesn't he? And my recommendation is follow him, read about him, follow his footsteps, and you'll live the life of more that you're looking for. And I hope, if you'd like to talk more about humility or what's going on in your life, feel free to reach out to me. That first call, that initial call, it's always free. And I love to talk with my audience. Just reach out to me at mike@truemanlifecoaching.com. Let me know that you want to have a conversation. Let's set it up. My calendar is on my website at truemanlifecoaching.com. And, I hope you enjoyed this conversation about humility today. I think it's an important one. And I hope it made you think a little bit. And I hope it encourages you more than anything that, you could take a look at your life and determine how you can follow the humility of Jesus in it. If you enjoyed today's show, I hope you did. Grab your phone right now. Forward this show on to a friend, not because my ego needs it, because maybe somebody needs to hear the true man messages. Maybe somebody who needs to learn more about being a true man. I would be grateful, and my hunch is they'd be grateful to get some of this information as well. With that, thank you for listening today. It's a blessing to have an audience that follows the True Man podcast. And so prayers to all of you. God bless, and go out and make this your very best day ever.